Brendan
time,
Meyer,
Patrick.
who is an immigration attorney that we've worked with over the years to really lead the charge and talk about all the different visa options ranging from 100 to a million. And then I'll be jumping in at times to talk about the different businesses that are eligible under those different visa categories. So Brandon, maybe you could talk a little bit about options starting at as low as 80, 100,000 for someone that's looking to move to the United States.
Thank you, Patrick. Good to talk to you today. Great to appear on your webinar once again. Always a good time and always informative. So, yes, to answer your question. So, there's lots of potential visa options to the U.S., but many of them are limited either based on education or skills. Those tend to be the main way people come to the U.S. or family. But we want to focus on the investment aspect. And that really only, in most instances, provides one of three potential options. Number one, the so-called E as in everything, E2 Treaty Investor Visa. And that is based upon bilateral trade and investment treaties between the United States and particular countries. As of last count, there's approximately 90 countries in the world whose citizens can qualify for these E2 investment visas. The next option for many people is a so-called L1 intercompany transferee. That is not restricted by nationality like the E2, but unlike the E2, in which you can either purchase an existing business in the US or set up a brand new business with the E2, the L1 requires two businesses, one overseas and one in the US to establish eligibility. The third and final option for many people is the so-called EB5 visa process. And that's that's generally speaking, but not always, a passive investment made into someone's project, although you could attempt to set up your own and operate your own EB5 business, and we'll talk about that during the course of this. That requires either an investment of $800,000 or $1,050,000. The different, like the L1, there's no restrictions on nationality, but the EB5 does have some other sort of different restrictions than the E2 and the L1. The main one being the E2 and the L1, once approved, allow the investor and their families to move to the U.S. immediately after approval. The EB5, depending on certain circumstances, that's not always the case. There's sometimes a waiting period before investors and their families can come to the U.S. And so those are the three general categories of visas by investment that the U.S. government offers people.
So someone that has $100,000, they're looking to move to the U.S., they can start a business, buy a franchise, buy an existing business. Why would they do the L1 versus the E2 visa?
So only in the circumstances where the person is from a country, say, such as China or India or Vietnam, are three primary examples of countries that do not have trade and investment treaties with the U.S. that allow for E2 visas. But if the investor is from, say, countries such as Mexico or Canada or the United Kingdom that does have an established E2 treaty with the U.S., the E2 for that $80,000 to $100,000 range probably makes the most sense as the visa option of choice.
And what are you seeing? Like, I guess what's required? Is it as simple as putting $80,000 in a bank account or $100,000 in a bank account and you get an investor visa, or what does the investor have to show?
So this is one of the potentially some of the challenges with the E2 and the L1. U.S. immigration, they're very uncomfortable in many instances with the scenario that you just laid out, Patrick, where you say, hey, I have 80 to 100,000 in a bank account in the U.S., And once you grant me the visa, then I'm going to do all these great and wonderful things. They ideally the U.S. government, either on the E2 or the L1 route, wants to see some level of business activity in the U.S. prior to their approval of either visa category. So, bank account in the incorporation in the U.S., bank account in the U.S. with the funds available, um, office space if relevant. Ideally, even some employees and customers with revenue. So, take it in reverse order. A business that has customers and revenue and employees, once you start going down that list, the approval rate drops. So something that has, ongoing business operations, high level approval. Something that just has the bank account, maybe office space, but not really that much activity, that decreases the likelihood of initial approval.
And on the office space, that's well said that there's kind of like a spectrum, but could someone get by with like just a letter of intent, or they need to have like an executed lease before they apply for the E2 visa?
Ideally, an executed lease, because that shows real commitment. If nothing else, X amount of money every month to pay for this space. Now, fortunately, a couple years ago, the U.S. government on the E2, explicitly on the E2 side, and more implicitly on the L1 side, allows for home-based businesses.
Have you tested the waters yet with investors with a home base, like an e-commerce business?
We have, and we were successful out of London, the U.S. Embassy in London in that regard. One challenge of the E2 is that each consular post has its own different perspective on issues. So, someone could always say, oh, well, the U.S. Embassy in, Yaoundé, Cameroon, which Cameroon does have an E2 treaty. Oh, they rejected mine and there was a home-based business. And that might be true, but it might not be because of the home-based business. It could be for any other issue that results. So, it's just a totality of what you bring to the table, but a home-based business is now permitted.
What we've seen, and we've had 500 plus clients, but not nearly as many clients after adding up all the investor visa categories that you work on. But on the E2 visa side, it seems like some consulates are definitely harder, where I've never had a Canadian denied, but I have had clients denied on the first attempt in countries like Pakistan and Egypt, where it just seems like the stakes are a lot higher, where they're much more critical of the business, of the applicant's intention to go back home. Have you seen that with your client base?
Yes, for the E2, it's unlike EB5, which leads directly to U.S. permanent residence, aka a green card. The E2 is just seen as a temporary visa. So each country, as part of the treaty, has its own period of time that they can be on each E2. So you cite Egypt for an example. As an example, Egyptians are granted visas to the U.S. in 3-month increments, which is a real hassle. I mean, once they're admitted to the U.S., it's in 2-year increments, so they have to constantly renew it, which means that their business is constantly under the scrutiny of either the consulate or U.S. immigration, whereas Canadians and citizens of the United Kingdom are granted visas in 5-year increments. Either way, depending on which country, the E2 is difficult to transition into U.S. permanent residence, so there's always a constant renewal. It can be renewed effectively forever, but the importance of working with good partners in terms of on the business side, the legal side is very important, because the consulates, they want to make sure that people are coming to the U.S. to actually do what they say they're going to do on the development side, and not just set up a bank account, a sham company on paper, and then come to the U.S. and just disappear and go do something.
We've seen that like in Argentina and Buenos Aires, the consulate there is pretty tough, because apparently, allegedly, a lot of Argentines were going to be developers, develop a ton of real estate, and
Mm-hmm.
or buy and flip homes, do like 20 flips.
Mm-hmm.
But then they try to renew after 5 years, and they flipped like one apartment or two
Mm-hmm.
apartments, and that wasn't the business plan. So we have seen that where, sadly, some bad actors can really like hurt their fellow countrymen when others are applying for the E2 visa.
Yeah, absolutely. Future, present, and future applicants are pay for the sins of previous applicants
Yeah.
in their particular country. And so, for example, in the United Kingdom, they tend to be strict as well, and because what they're looking for, and the Canadian ones as well, because what they're looking for is people kind of close to retirement age, that have vacationed in, say, Florida, for example, nice quick 5-6 hour flights, who basically say, yeah, I'm going to open up, this type of business. And what their real intention is basically to retire or semi-retire in Florida. The E2 is not E2 and L1 are not retirement visas, as they were. And
Is there a
so,
retirement visa?
I mean, the closest thing to retirement visa is EB-5.
Okay,
There's
yes.
no requirement. You make the investment from lawful sources. The project creates the jobs, and you can sit
Reside
at Starbucks or your
forever in
cafe
the
of
US.
choice forever. Hang out at the beach all day and never work once you come to the U.S. So, yeah. So there was some concern that Canadians and UK citizens were kind of using the E2 as a retirement visa. So that's why they tend to be a little stricter, and it tends to be on the amount of money that's being invested and what the actual business plan is. So
Yeah, and then there's got to be some involvement.
Mhm.
There's the visa requirement of involvement, but there's also, you're making a small business investment.
Right.
This is generally a fragile investment when you compare that to investing in like Apple stock or Google stock, where there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. And if you're not on top of the financials, the employees, and everything that's going on with your investment, there's a good chance it's going to go wrong. You have to be on it.
Oh yeah, no, I own stocks in both companies, and believe me, I've seen a whole lot of wrong the last few weeks in that regard. So I know of what you speak.
Yeah. So, I mean, any investment, you have to be on top of it, or, you don't know when to exit or when to stay in. And especially when it's a small business, it's super important, as there might have to be a shift in the management team.
Hmm. Yes.
Um, Going up. So E2, we see a lot of clients at Visa franchise invest 100, 150K. If they're going to have a day-to-day manager from day one, more like
Hmm.
250. And that way they have more flexibility for traveling, going back and forth to their home country. Also in that 200 to 300K range, we see a lot of L1 Visa investors. And I know it could be done at a much lower amount, but what we've seen is that to create, I don't know how many jobs you want to see, Brandon, but to create sufficient number of jobs, it's a little tough to do at the 100K mark for
Absolutely.
that one.
Absolutely. So if we're talking about the spectrum of approval, active business with revenue employees has a higher rate of approval than just a bank account and a Delaware LLC document. And it's the same thing with the investment amount as well. Five can $500,000 investments get approved at a higher rate than 400,000, which get approved at a higher rate than 300,000, then 200, and down the line. And so, yeah, can you have an E2 or an L1 approved at 100,000? Sure. I mean, that really depends on the other particulars that you're bringing to the table at that time. But that's the so something that's quote unquote turnkey. Buying a franchise opportunity at that level, assuming that they're available at that price point, that's something that has, a higher probability of success than, yeah, I'm going to try to develop a business, a ground up business at the $100,000 level. And it's all about, what's known as I always talk about in law school, the totality of the circumstances. What is the whole picture? It's not just one aspect. I mean, conceivably, yeah, you could invest 5 million in an E2 business and still get denied if it's just depending on what you plan to do. So, just like everything else in life, more is always preferred to less. I mean, but so but it's the whole picture that you paint and paint to either the consulate, embassy, or U.S. immigration that allows you to get these approved.
And then on the L1 side, you prefaced at the beginning of our chat today, but they have to have a company also abroad. So, say
Right.
a Vietnamese entrepreneur has a business in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
What does he have to do? What does that business have to look like for him to transfer himself as an executive or a key employee to a U.S. business?
Right. So the bare minimum of eligibility requirements are twofold. Number one, that there's 50% or more common ownership between that company in Vietnam and the company in the US. Now, the transferee doesn't have to necessarily own any shares of either company in Vietnam or the US, but whoever does basically have to draw a Venn diagram and show 50% or more common ownership. That's number one. Number two, the transferee has to work in either a managerial or executive or so-called specialized knowledge capacity for the Vietnam entity for more than 1 year in the prior 3 years. Those are really the only two stated requirements almost for the L1. Everything else is just pretty much subject to interpretation. What is a specialized knowledge job? What is a managerial or executive job? Okay, they own, there's wholly owned subsidiary. Okay, that's fantastic. We got that. Now what? What do they plan on doing? Now the question always comes up is, okay, in the Vietnamese context, okay, well, the business we have overseas is an import-export business. The business we want to have in the U.S. is, we want to buy a frozen yogurt franchise, for example. There are two different businesses. Is that permitted? And the answer is yes, it is. There's no prohibition. Just because you have import-export business overseas does not necessarily mean that you need an import-export business in the U.S. Can it be helpful in painting the picture? Because you absolutely say, well, we have the successful import-export business in Vietnam. That means we're just going to, that means we have an idea of what we're doing when we come to the U.S. Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, could you do that restaurant business franchise in the U.S.? Absolutely.
And for that Vietnamese entrepreneur using that case, are they looking at how much his company makes in Vietnam, the jobs that are maintained in Vietnam?
Absolutely. So it goes to credibility now, because if you say, hey, I'm going to invest all this money in the U.S. and hire all these people, but your tax and personnel records in Vietnam show you have 20,000 a year U.S. in revenue in one person. I mean, let's be honest about this. That's something just doesn't look right.
Yeah. How are they going to sustain? How are they going to open up and sustain an operation in the States?
Exactly. So that's obviously, we all know why that business in Vietnam shows that little revenue and that little number of employees. We get it. But, if you want to be taken seriously on the L1 side, you may want to, take a look at your books and maybe revise the numbers and, bring some people on full time, because, one thing that people overlook as well is that the L1 adjudicators are mostly based in Laguna Niguel, California, which is about, depending on traffic, about a 30-minute drive to Little Saigon area of Orange County. About 25 to 30% of the adjudicators are, trace their origins to Vietnam. So they look at your L1 and be like, chance, or they could call their cousin.
Yeah, exactly.
And be like, hey, go to this address on Pasteur Street and tell me what you see. And I walked in and there's 100 people there.
Okay.
Oh, really? They only have 5 on their L1. So there is a credibility aspect to it as well that everyone needs to keep in mind. That unfortunately, when people try to do this themselves or don't partner with the right folks, this is where things can go wrong. And
it's not like the instructions aren't super clear that the government provides. It seems like It's mostly based on experience and like actually seeing like a lot of case flow.
Absolutely. I mean, whereas with EB5, the investment amounts are clear, 800,000 or 1,050,000. There's nothing in the law on the E2 or L1 side that says anything about minimum required investments. So it's all about, you're absolutely right, experience and knowledge to get it done
And
correctly.
then moving up, how I see, then there's E2, say starting at 100K, and you can do it for less, but
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it's going to be a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
L1, 200, 300,000. And then we've had investors, entrepreneurs do the EB1C,
Mm-hmm.
which most of the time it seems like they're investing like 500K.
Mm-hmm.
Could you walk through a little bit about that green card option and that option for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so if the E2 does not, well, sometimes it does. So the EB1C, it's known as a multinational manager petition. So it the, the as you read the rules around EB1C, they're almost identical to the L1A, and that's not accidental. So the L1A feeds for a lot of people directly into an EB1C, or as you mentioned, Patrick, some people can start directly with the EB1C. And I think the idea is that L1, I generally recommend against going straight to the EB1C. I understand people why people do it, but as you mentioned, it takes more to get it done because basically you're going for, you know, the home run, the slam dunk, whatever sports analogy you want to use from the beginning with the EB1C. Whereas the L1's more incremental. You get the L1 initial one, then you renew it, then you go to the EB1C. So you can actually build a business toward a credible EB1C. Maybe start off with 150,000, develop your client base, develop, revenue, invest more, and say, okay, great, now we can do EB1C. Or EB1C, you're trying to start something or buy something right from the beginning. So, it takes a bigger commitment because it's all about the credibility of the issue. Because no way is USCIS going to grant an EB1C to someone who hasn't done an L1 prior to that with $100,000 investment. So that's why they tend to come in at a higher price point from the beginning because you're basically, poker analogy, you're going all in at once.
Yeah, and like maybe that L1 invest, we've had a few of these cases where the initial investment for the L1 was more in that 100, 200K range,
Mm-hmm.
and they grind it and they reinvest it, and then they were able to get up to, be a manager of managers. And
Mm-hmm.
had they had bought that business from day one, it would probably cost them 500 to a million, but they
Mm-hmm.
grew it basically themselves from the ground up. So
Right.
they didn't have to inject fresh capital. It was just reinvesting their earnings to continue growing.
Absolutely. So, I guess it depends from client to client, but, I prefer to people start on the L1 and, build it up. And that way too, they can see if they like it. If they don't like the US.
Exactly. Yeah, we have 20-30% of our clients don't stay in the US more than 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just it's a great place for many people, and some just want to have an experience in the US, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe have it where their kids are living in the US. So going right to a green card might not be the right choice for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. But that option does exist.
And then before jumping into the behemoth, the 800K or a million plus option on the EB5, we had some questions come through. I'll take
Excellent.
the first, and
Sure.
you can obviously compliment Brendan. But what is the success rate of the E2 visa? As reported by the State Department, the final approval rate is like 92%, 91%. It hovers around that. Why I say final approval rate, because they calculate it. There are people that apply and get denied, or that the consulate puts an administrative process in, and then they finally get approved.
Mm-hmm.
And any other insights, Brandon, on that,
Yeah,
the success rate?
absolutely. So we're talking about E2s in the context of individual entrepreneurs,
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
but a lot of large multinational companies such as Sony, Toyota, Allianz, Deutsche Bank, Siemens, and basically all the Japanese and Korean car manufacturers, all the German car manufacturers, all the
Yeah.
German banks, they're all E2 countries, and they transfer a lot of personnel to the U.S. Either essential workers or managers or executives using the E2 because it's very easy for them, and so that skews the numbers. Toyota and Sony, I think they'll set in an average year they'll send a couple hundred each, and I think their denial rate's probably as close to 0% as you can get.
That's well
So
said. Yeah.
yeah,
So
so
the individual investor that's trying to invest 60K, even 80K, the approval rate for that type of investor is not going to be 92%.
right, they're lumped in the same statistical pool as years ago when Sony transferred its president to the U.S.
Exactly. Or there
So
would be like political uproar if he was denied his visa.
right. So I wish they would break them out, the statistics out. They do the same thing with the L1s. They lump the individual entrepreneur L1s in with, all the Apple and Facebook
Yeah.
and Google L1s
IPM.
with your thousands and thousands. So my guess would be if you separated them out, the individual entrepreneur E2 are probably approved at somewhere, I know this is a wide range, but probably somewhere between 60 and 70%. And then within that, you'll see a wide variance from consulate to consulate. And probably the individual entrepreneur L1 approvals, I would put lower. I'd put it like the 50 to 60%.
So yeah, it really you really have to work with the right advisor and make sure that the business is as solid as possible and presented
Mm-hmm.
in the right way. Kamal had a question. Does the education matter for E2 visa applicants?
No, it does not.
And then how long can I stay in the United States on an E2 visa?
Depends on which country you're from. So again, if you're from Egypt, you're granted a visa for 3 months. If you're say from Switzerland, it's 4 years. UK, it's 5 years. These sometimes change. It's for Mexico, it's vacillated from 5 years to 1 year and back again. It all depends. Nevertheless, at whatever length of visa you're issued, every time you enter the U.S., you're admitted for a 2-year period. So that's something that you have to track and be aware of. So that works in favor of, say, your Egyptian E2s that, if they don't plan to travel outside the U.S., it's great. Even though their visa's good for 3 months, once they enter the U.S., they're allowed to stay for 2 years. It's a hassle for our Swiss applicants who have that 4-year visa, but are only granted admission in 2-year increments.
Well
So
said. And then what is the processing time for the E2 visa? What have you been seeing?
it really depends. And so, some posts, I call it the coronavirus vacation. Some consular posts out there are citing, something that's been going on for 2.5 years now as a reason why, oh, poor them, they can't adjudicate E2s. So that's like, for example, Santiago, Chile, Ankara, Turkey. There's a few other.
I think Granada is still on hold. It's been like,
Yeah,
it's been 2.5
Amsterdam.
years with this
Yeah,
pandemic.
Amsterdam problems there, Madrid problems.
Amsterdam's on hold. Yeah, we're having issues.
And so it really depends from post to post. For example, Karachi claims it's five days. That's right, 5 days for an appointment. I don't necessarily believe that. I'm happy if anyone from Pakistan's out there. We're happy to test that proposition. Otherwise, yeah, some posts are coming down, still slow, but are improving, such as London and Toronto. So, and these should all improve over time. So it's post specific, plan ahead, regardless of where you are in the world, except for maybe Pakistan, a few other places that claim, such short processing times. If you need to be the US in 3 to 6 months, it's probably not going to happen, unfortunately. It's going to take a little bit longer.
Yeah, so I think definitely it's good to budget in a year, start the process like a year ahead of when you want to move. And obviously, if you have children, you have to figure out, like, you try to get here in August or July for the school year. So
Yeah,
plan ahead as much as possible.
absolutely.
And then Macias asked, how do I know if my country is a E2 visa treaty country?
Great question. So there is, maybe I can find the link and send it. But basically, if you go to, you could probably just Google U.S. E2 countries, and it'll take you to a web page by the U.S. Department of State, because they're the ones who control E2 visas in the treaty, and it'll list all of the countries. And also, too, there's also Google visa E2 visa reciprocity schedule. So not only will tell you which countries apply, but how long their visas are good for. Oh, there we go.
You're right. That was the first thing on Google. So you have the list here, and we'll
Yeah.
be sure to include that in the description of this YouTube video following the live broadcast.
Yeah.
And
And then
then
you
the
saw,
other
oh, sorry.
one
Oh, sorry.
was
Actually, go back, Patrick. Go back one.
sure.
Because I saw the link there. So you
Oh
see
yes,
U.S. visa reciprocity and civil documents by country. So
U.S. visa. Oh here, yeah,
scroll, yeah, and that should take you.
and yeah, you just choose your country. So
Oh, there you go.
we can
So
go Argentina.
Argentina, and then
Click
you can
E.
scroll down, and there you go. 5 years.
Yeah, cool. We'll definitely be sharing that in the description.
Excellent.
And we had a few questions. We had a few questions coming through on the EB5 visa.
Okay.
Before we tackle those, could you give us a little update? What is the EB5 visa? What's going on? Can someone invest
Uh,
passively, or do they have to be actively involved now? What's going on with this EB5 visa?
yeah, it's either the 800,000 or the $1,050,000 question. What is going on with EB5? And I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, the EB5 for almost the last year, I can even go back a little further, has been just this cacophony of completely avoidable disasters and utter stupidity among pretty much everyone in the industry. And I'm fine going on record and saying that. And if anyone in the industry disagrees, or feel free to give me a call. We're happy to discuss it. But as we are today, as of May 19th, 2022, what is the status of EB5? So generally speaking, EB5, there's two types of EB5s. The first is what's known as the Regional Center EB5 program. And effectively what that is people are investing more or less on a passive basis into someone's project that has been given a license by U.S. Immigration to, take on EB5 investors.
And what kind of project is it? A hotel, real estate, a franchise? What kind of project usually?
Most of them tend to be real estate based. So hotels are very popular, franchises are popular, mixed use developments very popular. Something that has a real estate or construction component to it is very popular. Regional center type project, and the reason for that is well, investors tend to like things that have real estate attached to it, and two, whether you do the regional center program or the other type we'll talk about, the direct EB5, you have to create 10. Project has to create 10 jobs for U.S. workers. It's easier for people to show the 10 job creation through the construction projects on the regional center side, because they don't have to be payroll full-time jobs as they do on the direct side. Regional center program was on hiatus from July 1st, 2021. Effectively, it's still on hiatus today, although Congress renewed the program on March 15th of this year, and was supposed to start accepting new regional center applications for investors as of May 15th, so 4 days ago. That hasn't happened because the USCIS has just really dropped the ball on this, and everyone's very upset, justifiably so. Litigation. Make a long story short, yes, on paper we have a regional center program, and the reality is no one can tell you with any level of specificity when actual real life investors can start participating in the regional center program, which is unfortunate. So as of today, realistically, the only EB5 option only option for people wishing to go the EB5 route is the so-called direct EB5 route. Now, the investment amount's still the same, either 800,000 in a high unemployment rural area, or for a qualifying infrastructure project, or $1,050,000 in an area that's not one of those three. Why is it direct? Because unlike on the regional center side, where you, through the wonders of statistical analysis, you show job creation, on the direct side, the project actually has to show 10 or more real life employees working 35 hours a week who are qualifying U.S. workers. So U.S. citizens, permanent residents, asylees, refugees, not your brother, not your sister-in-law, not you, not a bunch of other guys on H-1Bs, real U.S. workers. So as I tell people, I have this story of a client I had from Mexico years ago that had a very successful business in the U.S., was on an E2, decided to transition that to an EB5. And so he's like, oh, great. My brother, my sister, her husband, my best friend. I'm like, no, they have to be U.S. worker. He's like, so I have to go out and hire 10 U.S. workers I don't know? Like, yeah, yes. Yeah, that's what you have to do. So, there are some of the project operators on the regional center side have put together direct projects so that you can effectively invest on a passive basis. Otherwise, prior to this whole regional center debacle, people who did direct projects were trying to create their own business from scratch, be it a franchise, or you'd see a lot of gas stations and restaurants and things like that. So as of today, the only EB5 is available is on the direct side.
And can you pull the investor? Like if you have a friend or someone puts you together, like could you both invest 800K and get green cards?
You used to be able to, but that's something that unfortunately changed in the new law effective March 15th, 2022. So you can no longer have multiple direct EB5 investor, or you can no longer have multiple EB5 investors in a single direct project. One investor per project.
Okay. So yeah, for the pooled investing in a real estate project, like, is it maybe a year off, 2 years off, or TBD when that will really open up and investors can start investing in real estate again for the EB5?
That's hopefully sooner than that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a school of thought out there that USCIS kind of created these hurdles to getting the regional center program restarted because they want to kill it. I don't think that's correct.
Yeah.
First, again, anyone from USCIS who's on this video and disagrees with the statement I'm about to make is welcome to give me a call and we can talk about it. But quite frankly, I don't think they're competent or smart enough to consciously destroy a program like this. The reality is USCIS is funded almost entirely by user fees, and EB5 is a massive cash cow for them.
Yeah.
So the longer they mess around and prevent regional center investors from filing their I-526 petitions, the longer it takes for them to clear up their fiscal problems. So I think more and more likely happens is, they were working in their own bubble without input from the industry. They didn't understand how the industry works. They didn't road test their ideas. And once they brought them to the public, the EB5 industry completely destroyed the logic behind what USCIS was attempting to do. I don't think USCIS had any inkling that this is how the stakeholder community would react. I think that they'll probably try to find a face-saving way out of it without saying that they've, backpedaled from their policy. I just think that they'll find a way to, make it go faster so they can start accepting investor petitions sooner rather than later. Again, when will that be? No one knows. I'm hopeful that this will all be magically cleared up in the next 60 to 90 days, which is fine because the reality is anyone who's starting EB5 now, it's going to take them a good 45 to 60 days anyway to do proper due diligence on projects and arrange for what's known as their source of funds. Basically assembling the documents to show that their money is being sourced from legal sources, liquidate any investments or assets needed to make the investment, and depending on what country they're from, figure out how to actually wire the money to the U.S. That all takes time. So, and the timeline right now is roughly in parallel.
And what I see, I mean, for whether it's E2, L1, EB1, CB5, you can invest in a franchise, but you're gonna have to work with Brandon to see what's going to be eligible for that Visa category. Mm-hmm. And at Vetted Biz, which is a sister company of a Visa franchise, we have a directory of 4,600 franchises, as well as about 6,900 businesses for sale, principally in the state of Florida, where we have a feed from the MLS of all the businesses for sale in the state of Florida. So I encourage anyone that's exploring entrepreneurship in the United States, if you don't already have an amazing idea and you're not already living here, like just going the startup route and developing something from zero, it's generally going to be riskier, as well as it could end up being significantly more capital than you anticipated. Where buying an existing business or going with a franchise, it's more predictable in terms of what you're getting into. And there's quite a few that are eligible for the EB5. Looking at the healthcare space and home care services, state of Florida, California, even Arizona, Texas, a lot of elderly, the baby boomers are retiring, and there's all different types of concepts that help out, whether it's senior daycare or sending caregivers to the seniors' residence. And there are, I believe, 40 or so franchises that are specialized in senior care in some capacity. And you can see some of them have 6 locations only. Others have 611. They're all over the board, anywhere from 2 to 1,000 plus locations. Some have been in the market just for a couple years, while others, and the majority, have been in the market for 10 plus years. So you can browse on Vetted Biz. And as you can see, the investment amount, it's not that high, even though these businesses are going to create 10 full-time jobs. You have to figure out how to spend that money somehow if you don't want to just have the E2, but also have the EB5. And with that, there's a possibility where you could buy the underlying real estate and almost operate basically a condo office, where that's where the executives are, that's where the training is. And there's all different types of franchises where there could be a retail space or a condo office where you could be operating your business out of. This could be all cash. Like, it's going to be easier to do that in a place like Orlando. Or if you want to move to San Francisco, LA, or Miami, you're probably going to have to use some leverage and get a loan to finance, because $800,000 with the real estate and the business isn't going to be enough to open up many types of businesses, including food, in San Fran, LA. Pretty much anything with food, you're going to be investing $1 million plus, probably more like 1.5, 2 million. So you could potentially get some financing to also own the building, or you could always decide to lease the space. One thing from Anthony Mallet, he asked, what is Ireland's processing time? I had opened up in my window here, and Brandon, please correct me if I'm not doing this right, but yeah. I put in Dublin on the State Department site for US visas. Is this the processing time for E2s, or is that an estimate?
Yeah, that That is correct.
So you're
Four,
looking at what?
5 months.
That's like basically 5 months
Yep,
to
that's right.
get the E2 visa interview.
Yeah. So for those, so the way this is broken down is, visitor visa is, B1, B2, student exchange visas, F1, J1, and then all other visas means all other visas. And so E2s, L1 and L1s are lumped into that all other visa category.
Hmm. And have you
Paris,
found this to be pretty accurate, or do you have to check with the consulate? Like I see
I
Paris is just 12 days.
Yeah, which, someone who's on my immigration lawyers discussion group that was complaining about Paris would be very surprised to see that the Department of State is claiming 12 days for an E2. So London at 80 days for E's. I think that's probably pretty close. Go to Karachi, see if they're still at
Yeah.
5 days, if I'm remembering that properly. So I did a call with a potential client from
4
Pakistan.
days. It's gone down.
4 days. So yeah, anyone from Pakistan we could be in the U.S. in a couple weeks if all goes well.
And then do you handle the process, scheduling the appointment? What do you help with exactly, like in terms of the investor getting their visa and legal
Yeah,
status?
so it's multiple phases. So we have to. There's several parties that need to be involved in this E2 and L1 process. Not so much of the EB5. EB5, like all the work's been done for you. The invest well, unless you're doing direct EB5, trying to do your own project. On the EB5 side, most of the work's already been done for you on the project and document side. But for the E2 or L1, we have to work with other partners, any corporate attorneys that need to be involved. They need the consulate and USCIS needs a very specific business plan. So work with a business plan writer to come up with the best presentation of your business as possible. Kind of any ancillary banking issues that would resolve from this. That's just to get it ready to get it submitted. And then we can also help with the appointment process as well, because that's part and parcel of the overall process. So
Okay.
kind of as much as we can from start to cradle to grave, as it were.
And Anthony had another good question that was a visa or a status we didn't talk about, but it's the international entrepreneur parole. Could you comment a little bit on that
Yeah,
status?
they're kind of like the Loch Ness monster. Everyone claims to have seen them, but they supposedly exist, but no one's actually seen it in real life. Like when they exist in theory, and I did see statistics of how many were actually granted.
And that's funny that you saying that, because you're in the Bay Area, where you would expect there being a lot of these international entrepreneurship paroles.
Right.
So.
I know there's people on LinkedIn claiming to be, international entrepreneur parole IEP experts, but it means they may have had one consultation that never went anywhere. I mean, I have to be honest, I have probably two that have never gone anywhere. And the reality is that more importantly, you could say my idea is great, and I got all the venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road and Menhill Park are gonna throw lots of money at me and whatever, and that's maybe that's right, but the reality is U.S. immigration hates the IEP program, so they're going to.
Why is that? Why do they hate it?
They just do. They just do. No reason.
Yeah.
And I think mainly is because it wasn't their idea. And effectively what it's doing is it takes a lot, in theory, it takes people out of the overall immigration processes that exist and creates a special program that they had no real say in putting together.
Huh.
So it's just pure bureaucratic BS. And so you could get together the best one, and at a minimum, U.S. immigration is going to sit on it and not act on it and hope that you basically forget about it and give up and go away. And then when you ask them about it, then they're likely to give you a very, very hard time. And the reality is that, if you could, in theory, qualify for an IEP, you could probably have other visa options available. And it doesn't really go anything. It's a parole, so it can be revoked at any time. It's difficult to leverage into a green card application. it really isn't something that's advantageous to someone if they actually get it approved.
Well said. So we've now gone through, Brandon, options for anyone that has 100K up to $1 million. This isn't an exhaustive list of visa options, but I think it's a good primer. And for those that are really looking to take the next step and move to the US, what's the best way to contact you to have a consultation and to see what visa options best given their unique circumstances?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, it's a total. Are you from a treaty country or not? If you're not, then okay, it takes E2 off the table. Do you have a business overseas? If you don't, well, it takes L1 off the table. Okay, how much do you have available? 400,000. Okay, that takes EB5 off the table, and then we start working from there in terms of how much, what's it going to be, and the regular details to figure out what's the most appropriate option. And who knows, maybe the IEP if might be the option too if you have a VC firm willing to invest significant capital in your idea.
Awesome. And is it best that foreign entrepreneurs that are looking to move here, they email you, go to your website? What's the best way to get in contact with you?
I mean, for better or for worse, my phone and my laptop travel with me all over the world. So that's the easiest way to get in contact with me is to email me at brandon@meyerlawgroup.us and
Perfect.
start the conversation from there.
So we'll be sure to add Brandon at Meyer Law Group. Brandon at Meyer Law Group.
Brandon at meyerlawgroup.us.
Exactly. We'll be sure to add that to the description, as well as include a link to your website for those that are interested in taking the first step to moving stateside.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks, Brandon.
Happy to talk to people.
Well,
Good talking to you again,
it was a pleasure.
Patrick.
I really appreciate it.
Likewise.